to episode 3 of EANS Coffee Break. Thank you everyone for participating. There will be a short 30-question survey after we can on how we can make our conversations even more impactful. My name is Marsiglia, and I am your host for Coffee Break. And I am the EANS Program Manager for ClassWallet, and EANS is the emergency assistance to non-public schools. We provide approximately 20% of the distributions of payments of $5.75 billion of funding all across America. And today we have two special guests. We have Lacey Bohlen, the Assistant Director for Charter Schools and Special Programs, and Patti Clark, Lakeshore Learning's Chief Academic Officer. Lacey, if you want to introduce yourself, please, and then Patti, you can follow.
Sure. So my name is Lacey Bohlen. As Matt mentioned, I'm the Assistant Director of Charter Schools and Special Programs for the Indiana Department of Education. It's kind of a misleading title because it involves a lot more than specifically working with charter schools. Obviously, that's why I'm here. I also oversee our EANS funds, as well as our Title IV funds, our 21st Century funds, out of school time funds, Title V funds, and then of course our charter funds. My background is in arts education, and prior to coming to IDOE, I was an arts educator for about 11 years.
Great, and thanks for having me this morning, Matt. And my name is Patti Clark, and as Matt mentioned, currently I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Lakeshore Learning Materials, where I have the really fun job of working really closely with schools and our teams inside Lakeshore to help provide creative and practical solutions for all kinds of initiatives, for providing materials and furniture for any kind of initiative you can think of. And currently, as you can imagine right now, we're spending a lot of time providing ways to help mitigate learning loss that has occurred due to the pandemic. Prior to coming to Lakeshore, I also was an educator, taught in K-5 for 10 years, was a curriculum coach and a teacher trainer, and really happy to be here this morning.
Thank you, team. And so we're super excited to share our content today around learning loss. We know COVID took a toll on the progress of kids' education. So today's topic will be around the creative aspect of learning. And Lacey, who has an arts degree, and myself, I like to produce music. So I'm also very passionate about kids and how they learn through the modern arts and creativity, and not necessarily the traditional 30 chairs in a line classroom environment. So let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. So Patti, let's talk a little bit about the present state in regard to learning loss through the pandemic. What are some of the challenges that administrators that you guys talk to are looking to address?
Well, obviously, I'm sure everybody on this call has probably started to see some of the data that has come out. I think just 2.5 weeks ago, NAEP released some data on their long-term trend test for 9-year-olds, showing that, test scores have dropped about 5 points in reading and 7 points in math. And another report from NWEA has shown that reading scores are much lower today for third graders than they have been in the past. And so we have a lot more students who are below proficiency in reading. And the good news with their report was this past school year, kids have made some good progress. They've been starting to catch up to the progress they've made previously in a year pre-pandemic. The bad news is we're still really far behind, and everybody's kind of estimating that it could take us several years to help try to catch kids up. And so how can we, I think one of the biggest challenges and conversations people are having is, how can we help address that, right? We need kids to make their regular school progress. We want to keep them in grade level whenever possible. And how do we help to fill in those gaps? The other challenge, I think, has been, providing social emotional support. We know kids were learning at home for so long, and coming back into the schools now and getting back into that routine and dealing with some of the emotions and things that are going on all over the place in this world has been a challenge. And so finding ways to support that, because when they're emotionally healthy, they're able to learn so much better. And when they're struggling, it's much harder to do that.
Thanks, Patti. And Lacey, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I do want to go ahead and echo everything that Patti just said. The recent data reports have really shown that it, on the positive side, we have shown some incredible growth, and that remains the same in Indiana. There are still a lot of areas that we as leaders need to grow in, though, in supporting that and addressing that learning loss. Because just as she mentioned, though we are growing, we are still considerably behind. I think that the biggest challenge that we're really seeing in Indiana too is, Matt, what you alluded to in the beginning, is how do we creatively address those situations? How do we creatively address that idea of learning loss? How do we focus on engaging the students, not just academically, but also emotionally? And again, speaking to what Patti said, coming back into school, going from such a huge disruption, such a shared trauma, and then coming back into a space and trying to pick up that, school has a pretty strict structure to it. So going from chaos to very, very strict and structured is going to cause friction, regardless of how old you are. I mean, as an adult, I suffered from that kind of transition back and forth. So we've seen a lot of efforts by administration on not just focusing on addressing those core subjects like math and reading, but also the social, emotional, and behavioral aspects of the losses that occurred there as well.
Well, that's a great transition into some specific strategies. So we talked about the challenges, and now let's look into strategies. I know there's so many ways to be creative in the modern world with all the information that we have today. So Patti, from your standpoint, what are some of the strategies that Lakeshore Learning is using to implement with EANS purchases specifically to address learning loss?
Sure. Well, let me start by maybe continuing that conversation about social emotional, because like we mentioned, we want kids to have social emotional wellness and health, and that's going to help them learn. We've been working with a lot of schools in creating, wellness areas, wellness rooms, sensory rooms, where I know they've been even using funding and staffing those with mental health or counselors. But we've even had some schools where sometimes there's not a lot of space in that school, but we've been working with some schools and creating small calming corners in every single classroom, made up of a couple of really comfortable soft seating, upholstered chairs or bean bags, along with materials, fidget materials, strategies, breathing strategies, calming strategies, and then some training that goes along with it to help teachers really see how to effectively use those spaces and create those areas, safe places in the classroom where students can go and don't necessarily have to leave the classroom to be able to kind of help support when they just need a moment before they help join back to their class. Helps a lot when they get back learning with lessons and in their groups. They can be more collaborative, they can communicate better. So that's one way, one program or solution that we've been doing a lot with programs or schools. The other, as far as learning loss, there's really kind of two aspects to it. And then maybe Lacey, whenever you want to jump in, feel free here, but there's some solutions we've done during the school day in the classroom. And then there's some great solutions for extended time after school, before school, summer school, to do some of those really fun, creative ways to get kids continue to learning, but it's a fun place and a place they really want to be. So in school, I think we've done a lot of creative things with looking at just reimagining spaces. And are there spaces, we're going to need a lot of more small group intervention, pulling together when we're working on things to fill in some of the skill gaps that they may have gotten over the past couple of years in order for them to get into grade level work. And so, putting together, using flexible seating, desks, tables, even some storage units that can easily be rolled and create kind of small group tutoring spaces anywhere. People are reinventing their media spaces, creating small group areas in their media or libraries where they can have small group things going on. They're doing it, gosh, when you have flexible desks and tables, you can easily roll things out into a hallway. If you've got some tutors coming in and they can work with kids and then they can come back in, you can create it in a small corner in your classroom. We've done things like mobile carts that we fill with some hands-on materials and resources that teachers can use in the classroom. Ways to make it, kids have spent so much time the last couple of years digitally on the computer learning, and you kind of miss that sensory, hands-on, tactile way of learning. And so we've done carts filled with, for the, K3 students, filled with magnetic boards and magnetic letters and tactile phonics cards where they can actually have tactile sound boxes, helping them to learn to blend the words, and just hands-on type of materials that can help supplement and catch kids up on some of those skills. Those are a couple of examples in the classroom. I know we'll probably get into talking a little bit more about some really creative and fun ways to use extended learning time as well.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. And maybe Lacey, maybe you can define in your words, since you're seeing, EANS purchases all throughout the state, and you're the one actually approving the orders. How would you define what it means to use creative arts to address learning loss? And maybe you can tack on a couple other strategies that you've seen schools use in Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are definitely some things that I want to speak to that Patty mentioned that I think really align with some of the things that Indiana is seeing, some of the needs that Indiana has, and some of the ways that we were trying to move forward in addressing learning loss and just building ourselves back up from that. So speaking specifically, Matt, to your initial kind of lead in for that question there, which was the integration aspect, where we're making education engaging again, not just that at a school, or I'm sorry, in the classroom space where it's just the sit and get conversations. It's the students are engaged, the students want to be there. And I'm absolutely going to steal a term that I've heard Lakeshore Learning say, which is the disguised learning, right? Where the kids, they're so into it that they don't even realize the breadth of skills that they're acquiring through these activities. And I'm not just talking about math and language skills. I'm talking about social skills, skills that prepare them for the workforce, skills that prepare them for furthering on in their education, being able to collaborate, being able to have conversations, being able to share emotions, being able to lose a game and not be angry, right? So all of these different things that we see that come from that hands-on engagement that build the students in more than just this single facet. They're able to grow in multiple directions simultaneously. So when I think of integration and when I think of that engaging, I've mentioned previously that it's kind of like almost like a continuum, right? A scale that could circle back on itself, and that you can think of integration as purely the creative aspect, where you have arts integration and you're bringing in this robust curriculum that involves multiple disciplines so that students are more thoroughly engaged and they're growing in those multiple directions through that lesson. But there's also along that continuum, the concept of creatively integrating behavioral techniques into the classroom. So, and I kind of wanted to touch on that real quickly, because that's absolutely something that we have seen a lot of in Indiana, in providing those spaces for students to re-regulate themselves. So rather than removing them from the classroom, because one of the huge things that we advocate for in Indiana is keeping students in the classroom, mitigating that that automatic defensive response, not sending the students out, but keeping them so that they can learn to re-regulate themselves, and so that you can build your relationship with the student, right? Because the second you send them out of the classroom, you've let go of that control, and you've kind of sacrificed a bit of that relationship. So a little bit of my teacher soapbox coming out back to where I am now. We've seen everything from the rooms like what Patti was talking about, where you might have a creative activity in there. You might have a quiet music making space. You might have a physical exercise space. I visited a school not too long ago that had everything from a treadmill so that the students could actually get some energy out, a yoga space where they could do some stretches and meditate, a soft instrument. Obviously we're not going to play electric guitar and, drums, but you might have a soft instrument space in there. And then of course, arts and everything like that, is they're notorious for being able to re-regulate and de-escalate. But we've also seen things like sensory deprivation rooms, where it's a very quiet, calm space that you can just enter into, and you just feel that sense of peace that comes over you when you enter in there. And I feel like, Patti, you kind of touched on all of that. So it's interesting to me to see how many different approaches we've had in Indiana in utilizing these innovative techniques to address learning loss in a unique way, rather than saying, yes, we are behind on math, we are behind on language arts, because we are, but we're growing, right? We all have to acknowledge the fact that we have experienced quite a shift in what our norm is. And understanding that the whole social, emotional, behavioral wellness and college and career readiness skills, they were in place prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic really emphasized the importance of them. So I'm very happy to see that in Indiana, they have continued to be carried on, and they've continued to have an impact. One last thing that I want to touch on real quickly is the out of school time space and how critical that can be for addressing learning loss. So I also oversee our out of school time funds, which includes our 21st CCLC grants, and then REACH grant, which is released from our ESSER funds. And we have a statewide evaluator, and their statewide evaluation recently revealed that 78% of students who are involved in 98 or more days of out of school time learning, specifically 21st CCLC, have increased scores in English and language arts, 77% increased scores in math, 94% of participants graduate, so out of school time participants graduate. And then there's a huge reduction in the likelihood of students to be expelled or have some sort of out of school time, or not out of school time, but out of school suspension when they attend out of school programs. So obviously within that out of school time space, we see a huge increase in those gains for learning in English and also in math. We see reduction in disruptive behaviors. And then we also see more on-track students that graduate on time.
No, that's great insights, Lacey. And I think that segues perfectly into the next question, which is what are some specific examples that schools can use to address the out of school time and make it, as you said earlier, a disguised learning where they want to show up, they want to be there, they're not necessarily checking a box, they're engaged, they're enjoying their time. So let's talk about some strategies that they can use specifically with EANS fundings. What can schools do to start an out of school time program? Patti, do you want to start?
Sure. It's a great segue, Matt, and we've been working with a lot of schools as they've been really thinking about utilizing EANS funding to kind of, whether they had already an after school program or a summer program, ways of really kind of boosting and elevating that program to help mitigate that learning loss. And Lacey's exactly right. When you're talking about extended learning, you want the kids to want to be there and want to come. And so we've been working, a lot of schools have done some creative things. I've had so much fun really thinking about and talking to them about it. Anywhere from, obviously the first thing is, where is that after school program going to happen? How can you creatively use your space? Is it a reinvention of the library or media center, again, where you're utilizing flexible furniture to easily roll in and create, or do you have an extra space, and can you really plan that space so that you have various areas where kids can play games, where kids can do performing arts, where kids can have a STEM or a makerspace area, and then creatively looking at how we can utilize furniture and carts and materials to create those spaces for them. Many of those after school programs and summer programs really kind of lean heavily onto that sort of enrichment, like that academy or club atmosphere. So there can be, a STEAM or STEM club or a makerspace, utilizing a cart filled with materials and some kind of table where kids can really learn to invent. Lacey talked about, not getting frustrated, having perseverance. STEM makerspaces are such a great way to help to build those social emotional skills, as well as so much math and science and even language arts, as they're having to write about their inventions or share their inventions. There have been performing arts clubs where you can utilize, we've put together some Readers Theater type scripts and programs, starting with Readers Theater, where kids can learn how to think about all the language arts and reading skills that you can really boost, but kids are able to perform, and which many kids just love to do. They've got arts clubs where we can utilize performing arts. You've got games, areas with games. We've done a lot of educational games. They're really fun, but they're boosting math and language skills at the same time, and it's disguised. Kids love playing games, and no, I don't want to have to do more homework or another workbook to catch up. I can play games after school. I can, the after school time utilizes a lot of outdoor. Often they're outdoors a lot. We've had one school, I thought was so creative. They put together a cart and filled it with all kinds of materials like dice and even write and whiteboards and active play equipment. And then we wrote really easy, fun activity ideas, because we also know when you're running an after school program, it's all hands on deck. You're often utilizing college students, or you're utilizing paraprofessionals or former teachers. And so being able to provide those materials, but then really easy ways to implement them, and they're fun and they're games, but they also are building skills, and being able to customize even some of those to specific skills that particular district or school needs have been some of the ways that we've been, kind of utilizing EANS funds to help really elevate those after school programs, expand those summer programs, and be able to serve more kids.
Patti and Lacey, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to just continue speaking about the out of school time space, and I do want to emphasize what Patti said is that, the out of school time space has proven to be less effective if it is just a continuation of the school day, right? So it is considerably more effective, and we have a plethora of data, specifically in Indiana, but also across the board, that if you have more engaging strategies, such as a reading theater program, right, that students will retain that information more. And that's in general, that's in the classroom and outside of the classroom. That engagement has proven to occur through those integrated curriculums and things like that, as I kind of previously alluded to. But just thinking about some of the things again that we've seen, the theater programs, how much that involves learning language and the ability to perform, and thinking about combining those skills where, again, we have those hard skills, those core curricular skills like reading, math, and everything that are put in there, but also are developing our social emotional skills as well. And then thinking about utilizing the out of school time space as a space to continue to engage underrepresented subgroups. So thinking about, for example, those STEM programs, right, and how we can work that so that we can target those underrepresented subgroups and really have them involved. Of course, we want to do that throughout the day as well. But specifically in Indiana, when we received some of our data back, we noticed that there's a gap. There's a gap between that learning, and the out of school time space is an excellent space to try to build and to try to narrow that gap. Obviously, carrying that into the school day is essential as well, but being able to capitalize on the out of school time space to really address that and to really have those engaging activities, I just think is incredibly important, and something that we have seen started with EANS funds.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to make our lessons more engaging in the day for the teacher, and then make it more fun for out of school time. Is there anything specific you would tell teachers today that are listening that how they can implement some of these strategies we talked about today?
Well, I think you mentioned, I think I have seen so many teachers that they are so engaging. And I think, the one thing that I would love to think about is wherever we can bring in more of the hands-on. Now, during the pandemic, there have been some really great things that have come out of it, right? I think we've learned a lot about technology, and we've learned a lot about what are effective uses and maybe some things that aren't as effective. And I think still utilizing a lot of that digital learning that we've experienced, but being able to come back now and supplement with actual hands-on manipulatives, particularly in math, and for those kids who are really learning to read, beginning phonics skills, being able to manipulate and break apart and put together words, being able to using tactile senses to be able to break down sounds and syllables, and makes that learning more engaging, and brings in all the senses, which help kids really help to retain that information and build those skills. That's probably what I say. And then as much as we can, kids today are gamers. They like to game, right? So as much gamification that we can bring into our lessons, and by educational games, there are so many great, both from Lakeshore and many other places, so many great educational reading and math games that really help kids continue to build those skills, but do it in a really fun way.
Thanks, Patty. And we have time for one more question. Or Lacey, did you want to add anything to implementation strategies before I jump into the last question?
I think we can go to, I don't want to take up all the time now.
Okay, sounds good. So we have a couple minutes left, and please now, if you have questions, the last 15 minutes of this webinar is for questions that you guys have for the guest panelists. So please start sending your questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those after this last question. But one piece of the puzzle that is we would be remiss not to talk about is the rationale of schools should use to submit with their purchasing requirements. Obviously, this is a unprecedented funds, $5.75 billion were given to these schools, and the odds of an audit by the federal government are highly likely, as Lacey can attest to. So what rationale should EANS schools be using to submit with their purchases, which would communicate the necessary language that makes it reasonable, allowable, and necessary as it relates to the COVID pandemic? And I think it's all these great strategies, but how can we connect the dots to make it an EANS purchase?
Yeah,
Lacey,
so
I think that'd be very great for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal that one. So Indiana is a little unique in our processes, and essentially most of the justification was included in their original application. There's always the capacity to amend the grant, right? But schools shouldn't be purchasing anything that hasn't already been approved on their budget. And this is not something that I'm incredibly concerned about, because we work on a plan, we work through the plan. If there's a change in the plan, they just let me know. And that has worked very successfully and very smoothly. So when it comes to actually submitting the invoice, one of the things that I do is, first of all, make sure that the activity is an allowable activity. So making sure that you select the correct bucket, or what allowable category it falls into is a huge helper for me there, because then I can kind of connect those dots, making sure that the invoice has the items actually listed in something that I understand. So not just, item number 3795, that I have no idea what that item is, so it's not very beneficial. But if it could say even like flexible seating, or, art supplies such as paint, things like that, that really helps expedite the process. So as far as the justification goes, if there's any concern, if it's maybe something that's a little bit edgier, which I always encourage, I like to be put under fire because it helps me grow. But if you have any concerns, there's the little box that ClassWallet has when you're submitting your invoice. So you can always add a little comment in there like, we discussed this previously. This is a request for playground equipment that's movable and non-permanent, so that we hit all those big categories. My folks in Indiana, I've had lots of meetings with them so that they know exactly what the expectations are, what's allowable, what's not allowable. Though really, the EANS is very interesting, is that there's not a lot of clarity. So a lot of times we can talk around specific things. So I think that as far as an invoice goes, ensuring that you're purchasing something that was on your budget, because a lot of times I do compare the request with what the actual budget was, and then making sure that the invoice has the listing of items is kind of the basics And then if you have any questions or concerns, including that comment in the comment section that ClassWallet has provided, so that, maybe you just need to jog my memory.
Thanks, Lacey. And Patty, for you guys, I know it's unique because every state program is run very differently.
Right.
You see all the layers of different complexities based on the state administrator and state rules. Is there anything specific you tell schools or to give rationale for them to help align the purchases to learning loss?
Yeah, well, I don't know how many people on this coffee talk listened to the last one, but I think from what I have heard and worked with states is if you just have a small narrative, right? Don't have to write a whole big essay on, we're purchasing the following items to help mitigate learning loss, whether it's to implement an after school or extended learning program that's going to help mitigate learning loss in reading and math as in regards to test scores we've seen based on this. Some sort of small, just a few sentences, really trying to just describe how the items that you're purchasing are going to be utilized, whether it's in small group instruction for tutoring, whether it's in an extended learning program, whether it's flexible seating to be able to create small group spaces, whether it's to support the social emotional learning to help mitigate learning loss. Just really kind of spelling that out has really just been probably the guidance that we have seen or have primarily worked well getting things approved.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Lacey. Well, great content today. I love talking about modern ways of learning and creative aspects. It's definitely a little bit outside the box, and it's good to see, the focus on social emotional learning versus the traditional way. So at this point, we've had our 30 minutes. I'm going to respect everybody's time. So let's open up to questions. I see a few right now in the queue. So if you have any questions for our panelists, not necessarily have to be about learning loss. Lacey is an EANS Program Administrator, among her other duties, so she could probably help answer some questions from her lens too, as the one who actually approves orders. So I'm going to go ahead and start looking at some of these questions we have. It says, Rebecca asked if we've already obligated our funds for a specific category such as technology. How can we shift some of the allocations to this area of learning loss? How do we accomplish that? Is it too late? It's a good question, and it's very specific by state, so it's kind of hard to answer, Rebecca, without knowing what state you're in. I do know from ClassWallet's perspective, we manage 11 states now, and every state is really unique. Some states open the door and say, yes, you can shift it. It's very easy. You have 100% flexibility. Other states are no, you need to submit an amendment. So Lacey, for Indiana, what do you guys do? And it may not help Rebecca, but it can give you an idea of how you guys do it.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Rebecca. I would definitely reach out to your program administrator, so somebody who would be in my role, and see if they have an amendment process. I know in Indiana, that's what we would do. It's a pretty quick and easy process. You just basically change your budget and then resubmit it back. We review and then approve, and you can move on from that. So it should not be too late because you have a whole nother year to spend even EANS 1. But as Matt said, every state is a little different. So your state might have obligated funds a little differently than what we did. So there's a lot of variables, but.
Thanks, Lacey. I see a question from Indiana, and they asked about EANS 2 and using it for HVAC companies. What are the rules and regulations? It looks like they're asking about what you can do for HVAC as it regards to EANS. I know that's a confusing topic for all states.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Talk about a hot topic. So HVAC is one of those, I mean, even the clarification that the feds have provided is confusing. But essentially what it is, it all boils down to federal funding cannot be utilized to make permanent changes or changes that would improve like the capital gain of the building itself. So while we can fix HVAC, and I see that you said that you cannot use them to fix some problems, that would be an allowable use if you're fixing a problem. And it might have just been a misunderstanding. You could not, for example, install a new HVAC system. That would require construction, which is not allowable with federal funds, and then damage, or not damage, but basically construction, where you're moving walls or implementing systems or permanently. So those are the key words there, is that it can't be permanent. It can't it's the whole thing, like with a window. You can fix a window, but you can't put a new window in. So while you can fix your HVAC system, you can't put a new HVAC system in. And if this is a question for just fixing, it was probably misunderstood by whoever reviewed it, and we just need to find some clarification. So yes, please email.
Thank you, Lacey. Paola asks, can EANS 2 funds be used to implement security cameras in our building?
That's a good question. A question that I haven't heard with EANS yet, basically because of the focus of learning loss and then mitigating the spread. There wouldn't be a direct connection for security cameras to be implemented because of those two things. It doesn't directly align with learning loss or mitigating the spread, but I can tell you that other federal funds could be utilized for those purposes. So I do know that there are funds out there that could be utilized for security cameras, but not necessarily EANS funds.
Thanks, Lacey. Debbie asks, how do I find out why a direct pay or reimbursement request has been rejected? So Debbie, if you are a ClassWallet state, it's very easy. You just go into the menu section on ClassWallet, go to reports and personal transaction reports, and from there you can click into the order and review the comments left by the administrator. Also, the email you receive on a rejection, it also lists the comments from the administrator, which tells you why it needs to be resubmitted. So just please check your reporting in ClassWallet to find out that the reason why I was rejected. Let's see. And she also asked how long does it take for approval to happen, and that varies by state, so it's really very hard to say. Depends on what state you're in. Lacey, you do yours pretty quickly, every couple weeks at the latest, I would say, but every state's a little unique. So let's see here. Stephen asked, are Project Lead the Way learning modules eligible for EANS funds to help students learn complex science concepts?
Absolutely. That's a fast yes.
Awesome. All right, Debbie asked, if I assume this role after EANS was set up for our private school, how do I find out what the approved EANS budget was? That's a good question. You do have a report in ClassWallet that tells you that on your home screen. If you click, there's 3 reports. It says orders approved, orders pending, and funds received. So on your home screen, if you just click the funds received button and you look at the date of the implementation, which was around, I believe, June 2021, you'll see a dollar amount that was deposited in your account. That's the money that was allocated to your school. And then you can also take a look at your personal transaction report, which lists every order you submitted with a time, date, vendor, all that good stuff. And you can, do some simple calculations to figure out what your remaining balance is. But your balance is also in your top right corner of your screen, so you have that as well. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Lacey.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
If it is your specific budget, because maybe you took over this role and the previous administrator had left and you're just trying to put together the pieces, that's where you would reach out to somebody who's in my role. We should have a copy of your budget that we can provide to you.
Thanks for that clarification. Let's see, do we have any other questions out here? Is there an update to will there be a second EANS award? It sounds like, yeah, most states, there's a couple states in ClassWallet that our EANS 2 is not launched yet, but every other state has launched. So I'm not sure, you may reach out to your state administrator, Debbie, to answer that question, but most states have launched EANS 2 already. I don't know if I've seen any more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and share this last part. This is a QR code here. So for those remaining and you would like to contact Lakeshore about anything we talked about today, they have a special line set up. So if you just scan this QR code with your smartphone, and it'll open to a website that you can contact a special EANS representative for Lakeshore to help talk about any of the things we discussed today around support for learning loss. Lacey or Patti, do you have any comments?
We have some great teams here, and we've had so many examples from other schools of ways that we've helped put things together to support learning loss for extended learning programs, for after school programs, for intervention programs, helping to kind of think through spaces. So would love to connect and see if there's any, just brainstorm some creative solutions.
Thank you, Patty. And I see one last question before I let everybody go. And I think Lacey may be responding. Can we
I am.
use EANS funds to upgrade internet infrastructure?
So my response to that was going to be that you do need to clarify that with your state. Every state is approaching things like that a little differently. I mean, I've been part of conversations even down to wireless mics, right? Talking about allowability revolving around that. So it's not a concern, but the interesting thing about EANS is that every state interpreted it very differently because it was very vague, and it still is very vague. So while in Indiana, we may consider something like that because it can be done still getting around those 3 core pillars where it can be non-permanent, it can not increase the value of the school, doesn't do any damage to the building, its structure itself, doesn't require construction. So in Indiana, we could consider that. Other states might have a more conservative approach because they might have interpreted that regulation a little differently. So you do want to clarify that with whoever is your EANS administrator.
Thank you, Lacey. And thank you, Patty, for joining today. You guys are great, two great thought leaders in the industry, lots of experience in the education field. So we appreciate all your guidance today. And we had a lot of people register, so we're going to be sending out this PowerPoint and presentation via YouTube. So please be on the lookout for that. If you missed it, you can share it with your team as well. And there's a short 3-question survey when we end, so we appreciate it. It'll take you 2 seconds to answer, to give us any feedback on how we can make these better for the future. And again, thank you guys for being part of this, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.